Well, I actually have a question about the final solution.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of yours.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm also a huge fan of Conan Doyle's.
So am I.
Yeah, I can tell. So, I mean, I guess my question would be if you could maybe describe your relationship with the Holmes mysteries a little bit.
Absolutely.
Your favorite, and what really inspired you to kind of tackle your own Holmes
Absolutely.
novel.
Yeah, I'm a lifelong Sherlock Holmes. I'm a Holmesian and a lover of Conan Doyle's work. That I would say Arthur Conan Doyle was the first writer that I had a relationship with, where I felt like, I mean, there were writers as a kid growing up whose books I had loved, Louise Fitzhugh or E.L. Konigsberg, but they were more like names on the title page, and they were kind of like a brand that guaranteed a certain level of quality or interest for me, but no more than that. With Conan Doyle, the voice of Dr. Watson is so lovable and so persuasive and so engaging, and it's very difficult. It has proven very difficult for 100 years now for people to really tease out the Conan Doyle and the Dr. Watson, and there's this whole sort of, as some of you probably know, there's a world of kind of mock scholarship in which people sort of pretend that there really was a Dr. Watson and there really was a Sherlock Holmes, and that Arthur Conan Doyle is the merely the literary agent for Dr. Watson. And I think that comes about because Watson does feel so real. But if you're not playing that kind of game, what you feel is like that behind this voice is this incredibly lovable mind, the mind of Arthur Conan Doyle, or so I presumed when I was 12 years old, 11 years old. And so I just, I read all the stories and the novels and got really swept up in the whole world of Sherlock Holmes, and to the point where I went on this search for a deerstalker cat, which, now this is like one example I give to my kids of how much better they have it than we did, back when we lived in a hole in the ground, which was that, you couldn't just go online and go deerstalker cat, size small, click, done, right? There wasn't anything like that. I went to the hat store in Baltimore. They didn't carry deerstalker hats. I went to the hat store in Washington, D.C. They didn't carry deerstalker hats. I went to hat stores everywhere I went for 3 years asking for a deerstalker hat. They didn't have one until finally my family, when I was about 15 and a half, we took a trip to Toronto, Canada, and I went to a hat store, and because of that strong sort of British, Scottish influence, I suppose, the hat stores in Toronto carried deerstalker hats, and there it was. Of course, now I'm 15 and a half. I don't want a deerstalker hat. I would rather have the skin peeled from my body than go to school wearing a deerstalker, or go anywhere, be seen in public wearing a deerstalker. But at that point, I had no choice. I had to. When the quest was over, I bought it. I still have it. And now I put it on every so often just so my children have something new to make fun of me about. But right at that time, I believe we're talking about like 1973, Nicholas Mayer published this book called The 7% Solution that was really probably the most successful. There have been many pastiches of people writing their own Sherlock Holmes stories, but this was this became a bestseller. They made a movie out of it, and I read it and I loved it, and it was really good. It was very faithful, and more than that, I was like, wait, you can do this? Like, you can write your own? You can just say, hey, I'm John Watson, and it was a foggy night, and there was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Hudson brought up the visitor, and Holmes was shooting up his cocaine, and you can just say all that stuff, and it's you, but you're Watson, and it was such a revelatory moment for me. And I thought, well, I'm going to do it too if he can do it. So right at that moment, my sixth grade English teacher assigned a short story, and we read a short story, and I said, I'm going to write a Sherlock Holmes short story. And since Mayer had his detective, Holmes, meeting Sigmund Freud, as I alluded to earlier, in the crossover with Sigmund Freud, I thought, well, I have to have a crossover too, obviously. So I had Sherlock Holmes meet Captain Nemo from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And they were fighting Professor Moriarty, who had an ironclad that he was going to be reading shipping lines with, and so the novelist got involved, and I loved writing it so much. It was a completely revolutionary experience for me because I got to play with language in a focused way with a goal in mind of like, I need to make my words sound like Dr. Watson as written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. How do I do that? Well, how does he do it? And I would look closely, and I looked at how Nicholas Mayer did it, and what were the tricks Nicholas Mayer used to make me think he was being Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, being Dr. Watson, and to pay attention to language on that level, transform my attitude towards language, towards writing, towards what it meant to be a writer, to that you could play with the materials of greatness in a sense, and that by doing so you might get a little bit better at it yourself. That was all so powerful. And so that many, many, many years later, after I'd written a lot of books, and I was at a point where I was feeling very dissatisfied with my work, and especially with my short stories. And I started to look at short stories and think, well, what is a short story? Why do I want to write them? Whatever got me interested in short stories in the first place? Well, the answer was, the Red-Headed League, and the Speckled Band, and the Blue Carbuncle, and the Six Napoleons, and those were my first short stories. And I went back and reread them, not for the first time, and something in me just said, here's a good place to start over. Like, you started with Sherlock Holmes, and you were off and running, and now I have this feeling of dissatisfaction. I'm just going to start a Sherlock Holmes story. But this time it wasn't going to be a pastiche. I wasn't pretending to be Dr. Watson anymore. I was writing in a voice that I created specifically for that book. Which, if anything, I feel like my model was sort of a Virginia Woolf, more of a very interior kind of voice, very erudite voice. Very psychologically interested mostly in what people are thinking and noticing more than anything else. Because after all, if you think about it, that's what Sherlock Holmes is best at, thinking and noticing. It was very much a restorative exercise for me, and it really worked. I mean, I loved writing that book, and when I was done with it, I did feel restored to a sort of more, I felt reintegrated, I guess you could say, with my original reading and writing self.
Thanks.
Right. Well, thank you all for good questions.